When we talk about colonial America, we're discussing the 13 English colonies along the eastern coast that existed before the United States became a country. These colonies weren't all the same. They were incredibly different. To understand them, historians group them into three distinct sections: the New England colonies in the north, the Middle colonies in the center, and the Southern colonies hugging the coast. Each region had its own geography, economy, and unique social structure. The New England colonies, places like Massachusetts and Rhode Island, had a tough environment. If you look at the geography, you'll see a lot of rocky soil and short growing seasons. This meant you couldn't run a massive farm there. However, they were rich in other resources. The dense forests provided excellent timber, and the deep, natural harbors gave them access to the sea. The people here had to be clever and resourceful to survive. Because farming was difficult, the New Englanders turned to the sea for their economy. They became expert sailors, fishermen, and whalers. Their vast forests made shipbuilding a huge industry. They were building the vessels that would sail the Atlantic. They became central to global trade and the British system of mercantilism. Their major hub, the port of Boston, was one of the busiest places in the entire British Empire. The New England colonies were largely settled by the Puritans, who were deeply religious and sought to create a purer form of worship. Their society was very organized and centered around the church and community. This led to a very unique form of local governance: town meetings. Imagine every man in the town gathering to debate and vote on local laws and spending. This direct local participation gave New Englanders an early and strong habit of self-rule. Moving south, we enter the Middle colonies, places like Pennsylvania, New York, and New Jersey. These were geographically blessed with fertile soil, a moderate climate, and wide, navigable rivers like the Hudson. This made them ideal for farming grains, especially wheat and corn. They were so successful that they earned the nickname the breadbasket colonies. Farmers could easily ship their heavy grain down the rivers right to the growing port cities. If New England was all about religious unity, the Middle colonies were all about diversity. Groups like the Quakers in Pennsylvania, led by William Penn, practiced and encouraged religious tolerance. You found Germans, Scots-Irish, Dutch, and Swedes living together, each bringing their own language, foods, and customs. This mingling of cultures gave the Middle colonies a much more open and cosmopolitan feel than their Puritan neighbors to the north. The Middle colonies were a perfect blend of farming and commerce. While they grew vast amounts of food, they also developed huge commercial centers. Philadelphia and New York City became massive trading hubs. They were not only processing the grain from the local farms, but also serving as gateway ports for goods flowing in and out of the entire continent, making them centers of colonial finance and trade. Down in the Southern colonies, Virginia, the Carolinas, and Georgia, the climate completely dictated life. They had very long, hot, humid summers and rich, fertile soil along the coast. This environment was perfect for growing crops that required a lot of land and a lot of hands-on labor. Because the growing season was so long, it supported the development of enormous farming estates known as plantations. The Southern economy revolved around a few incredibly valuable cash crops. Crops grown purely for sale, not for the farmer's use. In the Chesapeake area, the focus was on tobacco, which had become incredibly popular in Europe. Further south in the Carolinas, planters focused on growing rice and the blue dye-making plant indigo. These crops generated huge profits, but they required a constant, massive workforce to plant, tend, and harvest. That intense labor demand led to the tragic institution of slavery. Initially, Southern planters used indentured servants, but as the 17th century progressed, they shifted almost entirely to chattel slavery, importing enslaved Africans and treating them as legal property. This system was vital to the Southern economy. It concentrated wealth and political power in the hands of a small number of white plantation owners, creating a rigid and brutal social hierarchy. All the colonies existed under a British economic system called mercantilism. This idea was simple. A country's power depends on its wealth. The colonies existed solely to make the mother country, Britain, rich. The colonies were expected to provide raw materials, like lumber, tobacco, or iron, and then buy back the more expensive finished goods, like hats, furniture, and tools, that were manufactured in Britain. To ensure the colonies followed the rules of mercantilism, Britain passed a series of laws called the Navigation Acts. These laws were designed to keep the money circulating within the British Empire. They dictated that all goods going to or from the colonies had to be carried on British ships, and certain valuable colonial products, like tobacco, could only be shipped to England. This was England's way of controlling colonial trade and eliminating foreign competition. Even under the watchful eye of Britain, colonists were already practicing self-government. Back in 1619, in Virginia, colonists established the House of Burgesses. This was the very first elected legislative body in colonial America. While limited in power, it set a powerful precedent. Colonists were used to electing their own representatives to pass laws, a clear sign they were already managing their own local affairs. New England also had strong traditions of self-rule. When the Pilgrims landed in 1620, they wrote the Mayflower Compact, agreeing to form a government and obey its laws. And of course, the town meetings were pure democracy in action, allowing every eligible voter to have a direct say. These institutions instilled a deep sense of political responsibility and the habit of self-governance in the minds of the colonists. In the 1730s and 1740s, a major religious movement swept through the colonies called the Great Awakening. Powerful preachers like Jonathan Edwards spoke with fiery passion, urging people to have a more personal, emotional relationship with God, rather than relying solely on the established church structure. This movement had a surprising political effect. By encouraging people to challenge religious authority, it also inadvertently encouraged them to question political authority. At the same time, the ideas of the European Enlightenment were taking root, especially among the educated elite. Thinkers like John Locke argued that all people were born with natural rights, life, liberty, and property. Colonial figures, most famously Benjamin Franklin, applied these concepts of reason and individualism to politics. These ideas provided the colonists with the philosophical basis to later challenge the rule of the king. The simmering tensions over territory exploded in 1754 with the start of the French and Indian War. This was actually part of a massive global conflict, but in North America, it was fought over control of the Ohio River Valley. The British and their colonists fought against the French and their Native American allies. After 9 years of bloody fighting, the British won, securing control of all the land east of the Mississippi River. While the British victory was huge, it came at a massive cost. The war had been incredibly expensive, and the British government looked around and decided that the colonists, who had directly benefited from the war's outcome, should help pay for it. This decision marked a fundamental shift in British policy. Instead of treating the colonies as partners, they began treating them as a source of revenue to pay off the Crown's massive war debt. Immediately after the war, King George III issued the Proclamation of 1763. This line essentially ran down the spine of the Appalachian Mountains. The king forbade all colonists from settling west of that line. Why? To prevent further costly wars with the Native American tribes who were already living there. For colonists who felt they had just fought and won that land, this restriction felt like a massive betrayal and an unjust limit on their freedom. By the 1760s, the pieces were all in place for a revolution. The colonists were used to self-government from their town meetings and legislative assemblies. They were armed with Enlightenment ideas about natural rights, and now they faced a British government that was imposing new taxes and restricting their westward expansion. The cry of no taxation without representation would soon become the rallying cry that united the colonies against the mother country and led directly to the fight for independence.